Introduction of the Strange Case of Dr. M.K. Jessup, edited by Gray Barker. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Ben Tucker. The Strange Case of Dr. M.K. Jessup, edited by Gray Barker. Introduction. At 6:30 p.m. on April 20th, 1959, the body of Dr. M.K. Jessup, astronomer, researcher, and writer on the subject of flying saucers, was found in his station wagon in a park near Coral Gables, Florida. Medical examiners labeled the death suicide. It is understandable that this event caused a flurry in UFO circles, along with a great deal of speculation. Dr. Jessup had been greatly liked by the UFO students who knew him, or who had met him or heard him lecture. The authority that he, as an astronomer who dared to discuss saucers, brought to the field had been most impressive and appreciated. Most people who knew Dr. Jessup refused to believe that he had committed suicide, a most natural reaction in that the professor had, in his contacts with them prior to death, given no indications of depression or of having troubles. It was also probably natural for some of these people who feared suppression of saucer investigation from various sources to speculate upon the possibility of foul play. Some asserted that the communists had killed Jessup. Others uttered vague hints of more mysterious circumstances. For example, Richard Ogden, UFO writer and publisher of Seattle, Washington, wrote me some very strange assertions just as this book was going to press. Now, as for Jessup, Ogden states, his suicide was a frame-up. Jessup fell victim to hypnotism. He was sent a tape recording that contained self-destruction suggestions. The tape employed hypnotic suggestions superimposed on music and mixed with white sound. No one can resist being hypnotized by sound waves. This is disguised hypnosis, and it is foolproof. The white sound produces subliminal conditioning, a conditioning of the subconscious, a stimulus which affects the brain below the threshold of conscious awareness. There are certain sound wavelengths which are not audible to the conscious hearing, but are heard by the subconscious. The equipment is officially known as oralgesiac, audio analgesia, and connects to any high-quality music system, tape recorder, phonograph. The white sound is used by physicians, dentists, and psychotherapists. It eliminates all pain, and even major operations can be performed in hospitals with it, and there is no pain. It eliminates the use of drugs. This means it produces a very deep state of hypnosis, and is the most powerful method for hypnosis known to medical science. Do you realize that someone could simply call you on the phone, and when you answer you are given a dose of white sound that puts you into a trance before you could even hang up? Your subconscious would be given suicidal thoughts, and then you would go out and destroy yourself. Of course, first you would be told to write a letter to someone suggesting that you were about to commit suicide. This is what happened to Jessup. It is cold-blooded murder. No, I am not pulling your leg, Mr. Barker, and it is not too fantastic to be true. The equipment costs about $200 and can be obtained from a clinical supply company in New Jersey. We have not checked out Ogden's rather strange claims, but print his statements as an example of suggestions that have been made concerning Jessup's death. Ogden obviously referred to letters which Dr. Jessup sent to a few close friends before his death. The recipients have consistently refused to allow publication of these letters, and I have not seen them. According to information I have obtained, the communications express, first, a great deal of disappointment and depression, and second, the desire to establish some contact after death. There is some possible basis for depression which may have led to suicide, but it is not a strong one. Jessup was deeply dedicated to the field of UFO investigation. He was apparently unable to come up with a concrete solution to the saucer mystery. Obsessed with the urge to find out the truth, Jessup knew that he must devote his full time to the field. It was no doubt disappointing to him when he found that the sale of his books and income from his lectures could not support such full-time dedication. And alas, universities and foundations do not wish to connect themselves with such a controversial subject. A projected expedition to Mexico to do research on what Jessup termed moon craters fell through, when a university withdrew its support. This, as expressed to me in correspondence from Dr. Jessup, was most disappointing to him. This book does not attempt to unravel the mystery of the researcher's unfortunate passing. Instead, it is content with presenting a great many facts, along with some speculation. It is up to the interested reader or researcher to delve further into the matter or to reach his own conclusions. One of the mysteries yet unraveled is that of the strange Allende letters, and the possible connection of their author with a strange marked-up copy of Jessup's The Case for the UFO, which was reprinted along with all notations and allegedly passed among various government and military personnel. The Allende letters and details of the Varo reprint have never attained any wide circulations among UFO students, and this book, even though it may not solve any mysteries, will at least make the above material available to many for the first time. The writer wishes he had known Dr. Jessup better. Our friendship was limited to correspondence and personal meetings on 2 occasions. I liked Jessup and enjoyed his company immensely during our meetings. He seemed to have achieved much success as a person, along with whatever fame and recognition that came from his work. His absence from our midst is, as a human being, just as regrettable as is our great loss of his professional capabilities. From our own experiences in trying to keep on going in the UFO field, we can appreciate some of Jessup's great problems. Sometimes, to me, it has been almost understandable to believe the verdict of the examining authorities. Our desire to learn more of the truth and to keep up the fight has, however, urged us to continue. It is hard to believe that Jessup, with his great dedication, could have felt or acted any differently. Gray Barker, 1963. End of introduction. Section 1 of The Strange Case of Dr. M.K. Jessup, edited by Gray Barker. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Certificate of Death. When the editor learned of Dr. M.K. Jessup's death, along with some of the speculation concerning the event, it would have been easy simply to repeat the rumors, rather than trying to dig out some of the facts. In our attempt to obtain facts, we wrote to the Dade County Coroner, Miami, Florida, and requested a death certificate. The coroner evidently forwarded the request to the Reed Gautier Funeral Home of Miami, from which we promptly received a photostat of the original certificate. This certificate included most pertinent facts as officially recorded. From it, we note that death occurred in a station wagon, evidently parked in Dade County Park near Coral Gables, Florida, sometime between noon and 6:30 p.m. on April 20th, 1959. We are told that deceased inhaled auto exhaust, but are not given the particulars. Rumor has it that Jessup connected a hose to the exhaust of the car and introduced it inside the vehicle. It is officially decided that he died from inhaling carbon monoxide. The fact that there was no autopsy cannot be given great significance, for it is likely to diagnose such poisoning from obvious external symptoms. It is interesting to note that the box which was checked indicating suicide was under a probably heading, and is therefore not fully attested to by the examiner. It is likely unimportant, but we cannot understand why the father's name and the maiden name of his mother were unobtainable, since Jessup's wife obviously signed as the informant. The certificate gives, as name of cemetery or crematory, the University of Miami Medical School, and burial indicated as receiving vault. This indicated to us that Jessup may have, previous to death, assigned his body to that school for research purposes, or that his heirs may have so assigned it. If Jessup did not make such arrangements, what were the reasons leading to this disposition? This answer is not easy to find. A letter to the Reed Gautier Funeral Home drew the following reply. We are enclosing the death certificate, an additional copy, GB, on Morrison K. Jessup, which you requested. We are able to assist with these as they are a matter of public record. However, we are sure that you will understand why we cannot give out any information concerning particular details surrounding arrangements made with us. That such arrangements must have been unusual is evident from the usual procedure whereby funeral homes supply full obituaries, including place and time of interment. In this case, they did not wish to disclose such information. Publication of this information may indeed initiate a new flurry of speculation. If it leads us, however, to any further light on the strange case of Dr. Jessup, the effort will have been worthwhile. End of section 1. Section 2 of The Strange Case of Dr. M.K. Jessup, edited by Gray Barker. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Early Writings of M.K. Jessup. I first had contact with Jessup on November 5, 1954, shortly after I had sent him an issue of my publication, The Saucerian, and shortly before his first book was published. Here is a part of his reply. Thanks for your letter of the 4th Rec this morning, and thanks to J. Besser for sending you my name. I have another copy of The Saucerian which John loaned to me, Volume 2, Number 2, and must say that you are doing a real job with it. The labor alone of turning out all that copy must be tremendous. Yes, I'm doing a book. It is far along in the final draft stages, and we are hoping to get it in the hands of the publishers sometime next week. It is rather conservative as compared to some of the wild things so far printed, but I have tried to keep it factual, and have confined it to phenomena in the pre-Arnold era, particularly around 1875 to 1885. Altogether it makes quite a formidable array of proof and background. I am hoping to market it, in some part, through the Libra Research Group, which is a company being set up for selling books. I will want to advertise it through such publications as yours when the time comes, but not until after I have a contract with the publishers, which will be at least 2 to 3 weeks yet. As soon as I have the contract, I will send you some kind of release. I used to drive through Clarksburg fairly often, visiting relatives in Indiana, but haven't been through there in almost 2 years now. If I get out that way, I'll drop in and see you. Meanwhile, if you're over this way, drop in. I always have time to talk about saucer problems. Correspondence continued between Jessup and myself, and I quote some of it mainly to demonstrate something of the personality of the author. He was a most cordial person, and greatly enthusiastic about finding some solution to the UFO mystery, though he indicated that in his professional writing he felt it necessary to take a more conservative approach. This conservative scientific attitude demonstrated in his first 2 books may have been the reason that his writings were not popular with many saucer fans. There is so damned much nonsense, he wrote on December 16, 1954, being put out by silly people that one gets disgusted with a lot of it. I do feel that we are in a remarkable phase of human experience, and that the waters should not be muddied by stupidity. The problem is tough enough without any Adamskis in the picture. You mentioned wanting material. I had requested articles for the Saucerian. What do you want most? I am not as much in touch with current reports as are most of your readers, but I go heavy on the scientific approach. I would be glad to write a page or 2 for you, and if you wish, I would be glad to act, gratis, as astronomical consultant, if it would be of any value to you. I think I could do a page regarding the motive power of the UFO, stressing the point that jet, rocket, and magnetic drives are impractical. Later, when the book is out, I can spread out a bit, but right now I don't want to release too many unpublished ideas. On December 20th, Jessup sent 2 articles, with this comment. Well, here's a couple of brief efforts. Use them as you may see fit. They are sufficiently factual to be printable. The Mexican craters are real. I found them myself, and I've seen the Air Force negatives. The extension of the motive power theme to include some jolts to religion are rather obvious. The space race could be our God. They could have left the Earth millennia ago. Our book will hint at how sun worship may be connected with the space denizens. I read your report regarding Albert K. Bender with great interest. Looks like something did happen. He probably did stumble onto the truth. I will be glad of any additional information you may uncover. In my humble opinion, you are absolutely correct in your thought that the power source is the key to the whole UFO deal. I'm convinced of it from my own introspection and reading. I would like to talk to you about it. The above paragraph refers to some ideas I had expressed to Jessup. At that time, I thought it possible that the UFO mystery was being covered up because of a possible cheap power source, which might be revealed if too much became known about the saucers. I had also remarked that a good reason for the saucers not contacting us might be the possibility that they did not want to reveal their power source to us abruptly, in that it would disrupt our economic system. Following are the 2 articles submitted to me by Jessup for publication. End of section 2. Section 3 of The Strange Case of Dr. M.K. Jessup, edited by Gray Barker. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. UFO and the Moon by M.K. Jessup. Astronomers have seen the UFO in space. The sightings were documented more than 80 years ago. Documented and measures made. By triangulation, their habitat has been disclosed, and their parent ships identified. Something is known of their size and nature. They are a part of the Earth-Moon system. Beware of the smoke screen belched forth by Army ordnance and Dr. Tombaugh, who say they are looking for small satellites circling the Earth. There is a place where they can look, and with likely success, and they are not satellites. Strangely enough, these things are just about the right size to fit into a nice big cradle, or crater, such as the one on the Arizona plateau, and which would just be visible to an astronomer on the moon if he possessed a modest-sized telescope. The moon has come into the headlines recently in a big way. New cracks have appeared. Craters have disappeared. Craters have appeared. Craters have changed into diffuse, nebulous, brilliant white spots, not focusable in large telescopes, which show neighboring surface features with splendid clarity. Cracks, called rills, for generations come and go. Mists form within large craters and walled plains. Lights are seen moving in the dark parts of the moon. Sometimes an entire large crater with its central mountain is lighted with a peculiar and ominous glow. Walls, or cable-like structures, have appeared across craters, reported by Flammarion in the 19th century. See L'Astronomie. And by contemporary selenographers in recent news releases. See CRIFO for an object about the size of a small crater hollow leaving the moon. Dark greenish and brownish shades form within craters and progress with the moving sun. In Mexico, there is a group of 10 craters similar to the Arizona crater and of just the same size and appearance as the small craters on the moon. These are recorded on aerial films hoarded by the Air Force and restricted. They are classified, and you cannot obtain prints of them. Does ordnance connect these with the satellites which they wish you to believe that they and Tombaugh are looking for? Who knows? When a lunar crater appears, has it just been evacuated by a resting craft, 1/2 mile or 2 miles in diameter? When a crater disappears and astronomers with powerful telescopes confirm that it is replaced with some sort of dome, did something settle into that spot for rest or repairs? When it is replaced by a smoke-like nebulosity of changing shape and size, which casts no shadow, is something concealing an activity under a cloud from 5 to 11 miles across. The Library Research Group has been quietly digging these facts out of scientific literature, old and new. The mass of data is appallingly large. Its coordination is a huge task. Its explanation is slowly becoming more obvious. The Library Research Group is publishing its findings and conclusions in some books about the scientific case for UFO. Conclusions are that the moon is something else than a dead and useless world. The Earth and Moon form a binary planet, a system. There is more in this system than has previously been admitted, even though it has occasionally met the eye. The new books will tell you something about this startling situation. By pure deduction, we may be able to say what Bender is prevented from saying. Editor's note. Jessup's reference to Albert K. Bender was made, of course, before Bender told his story in Flying Saucers and the Three Men. It is interesting to note that Bender's visitors told him that they lived underground on their home planet and used craters for entrance and exit. Before Bender talked, he sent me a drawing for use as a cover for the Saucerian in 1953, illustrating the idea, though at the time I did not know what it was supposed to represent. Bender's drawing still looks suspiciously like a scene on the moon, and we still wonder if Bender might have known something about the moon which he later covered up in his book. Bender's cover drawing is reproduced in reduced size below. Jessup in 1956 wrote me that he had opportunity to do first-hand research on the Mexican craters. Of course you know of my interests in Mexico, and they have suddenly and unexpectedly come to life. 1. Some commercial interests are probably taking me to Mexico on a preliminary survey for minerals under the meteor craters, and 2, it seems very likely that the government may finance a full-scale expedition through the sponsorship of the University of Michigan. On the 1st, I would leave probably about December 10th for a 5 weeks trip. On the 2nd, it might materialize about April 1st and last for at least 5 months. It is all right to mention these things in publication, but do not yet mention the government or the U of M, as no contracts have been signed. To mention them might kill the thing entirely. I may be able to send news items from Mexico. Something happened to the expeditions and they never came about. In a subsequent letter, Jessup said that the university had backed down because a UFO researcher was involved. Jessup never did reveal the identity of the commercial interests who apparently were interested in financing him. Some people have suggested that the falling through of these plans was a link in the chain of disappointments which led to suicide. It is indeed true a great deal of the author's hoped-for success never materialized. His second book, The UFO Annual, and The Expanding Case for the UFO, did not go well. The UFO in the Bible, though a popular book among saucer researchers, did not sell well, possibly because of its short length. Incidentally, Jessup told me he submitted it to his publisher as a part of his manuscript for The Expanding Case for the UFO, and that this particular section was rejected and returned to him for possible expansion into a separate book. This Jessup did. The book is unfortunately out of print. To quote a letter from Jessup, "The annual did not sell very well, and it could not be expected to do so at $4.95. The price is entirely too high. I had expected a cheap telephone book style of printing and binding to sell at $2 or $3, but Citadel thought otherwise." Jessup did not complete his final drafts for his books. This work was done by his literary agent. In the case of the UFO Annual, his agent simply took files of clippings from Jessup and organized them into book form. This is how an unfortunate portion, involving 3 strange men allegedly seen in the Pentagon, got into the book. It happened to be a short story from a magazine, which happened to be among the clippings, and the agent included it, as if it were fact. Many of Jessup's critics pointed at this, using it as a means of discrediting Jessup's work, though it certainly was not the author's fault. In further discussion of Bender's strange drawing, see the foregoing, and Jessup's interest in moon craters, we feel that the following very recent material will be most interesting to include here. This is part of Riley Crabb's review of Flying Saucers and the Three Men, and is quoted from his January-February 1963 issue of the Journal of Borderland Research. This lack of human feeling and warmth from the men in black indicates to your editor that Bender's visitors were from the interior of some planet, the Earth or the Moon, and probably originating from the latter. Their alien frigidity became most apparent to Albert at his 7th contact with them, when the 3 appeared in his room in a more solid state than any previous time. Their human clothing was quite correct, except that everything, suits, ties, shirts, shoes, were all black, including the Homburg hats they wore. They placed their hands on his shoulders, and as they did so, I felt as if I had been touched by a piece of dry ice. My whole body suddenly went numb, as if I had received a giant dose of Novocaine. Bender passed out and regained consciousness in what appeared to be a large cavern, though, as he said, I would not have been surprised had I found myself on the moon. The cavern contained an enormous, cigar-shaped spaceship, and his escorts led him aboard it, into the familiar science fiction surroundings of shiny metal, light beam controls, sliding panels, glowing control boards, complicated machinery. You're at a spot on your planet known as Antarctica. We have chosen this area because it is uninhabited, and there is no one here to disturb us in our task. We have made this base by tunneling into your ice-covered surface and burying ourselves with only a small opening through which our smaller craft may enter and depart. The intense cold here does not disturb us, for we are not affected by your range of temperature. Our bodies acclimate themselves readily to such ranges. The monster said that living conditions on his home planet were even worse, forcing them to live in underground cities. Their space stations were elevated up through craters for takeoffs and landings. This again could be the moon. Such mechanical operations could very well be the source of glowing lights, seen so often in so many of the moon's craters. Thus, Riley Crabb expresses rather clearly that he suspects that Bender's visitors were from the moon, probably from beneath its surface. It does tie in well with Bender's drawing and Jessup's comments. A race of people from the moon would, in our opinion, take greater pains to cover up their origin than a race living farther away in space. Perhaps they deliberately lied to Bender, or that Bender had not told everything he knows. A moon race would somewhat naturally be interested in the ingredients of seawater, having no such water on their own world. Some of the material published in Bender's Space Review, reprint of these issues in book form available from Saucerian Books at $1.50, has convinced me that he took a great interest in the moon. Before Bender talked, I was greatly intrigued with the possibility that the moon had something to do with his closing down the International Flying Saucer Bureau. Rolf Toleno, TechCom, in his book The Flying Saucers, recently republished by Saucerian Books and available at $2, commented most interestingly about the moon and its inhabitants, and we quote from it. The craft most deserving of the name Flying Saucers were brought to this planet in 1949 by a midget race from your moon. These were slightly less than 100 feet in diameter, but much of this area was aerodynamic surface, the actual cabin being only about 16 feet diameter. They used an electromagnetic or earth induction drive, but different in construction than that used by the Norcraft. It was their first interplanetary flight, and their purpose was peaceful exploration. They became stranded here without base or supervisory control when the carrier craft became disabled. The small flyers were unable to return to Luna because they were incapable of spaceflight. One of the lunar flyers was shot down over northern Mexico by the over-anxious pilot of a Nor patrol craft when it failed to respond to signals or otherwise identify itself. Several others were caused to crash by radar to which they were particularly susceptible because of the insufficient shielding of their drive and control apparatus. As soon as it became apparent that the return of their carriers would be indefinitely delayed and that the craft and pilots were unable to cope with conditions on this planet, they were rounded up and returned to Luna by a Vicnor carrier. Of the original 37 flyers, 26 were safely returned to their home base. 8 are known to have crashed. It is assumed that the remaining 3 went down unnoticed. Sometimes it is difficult to locate familiar objects because they are so close to you, such as pencils stuck behind one's ear. Would it not be ironic that, after accrediting saucer origin to the planets in ours and other solar systems, if we found the saucers were based on our next-door neighbor in space? End of editor's note. End of section 3. Section 4 of The Strange Case of Dr. M.K. Jessup, edited by Gray Barker. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Motive Power of the UFO by M.K. Jessup. The preparation of my book describing the scientific case for the UFO required a tremendous amount of reading and introspection. The case for the UFO is scientifically sound, although still tenuous. Any speculation whatsoever about UFOs must be predicated on whether, in honest fact, the UFO does exist, and a modicum of observations are valid as reported. In the present state of saucer affairs, we cannot but accept their reality. Once this premise is accepted, a great many conclusions become practically unavoidable. Such elements include the speeds and accelerations observed, the apparent existence of solid but invisible, to the eye, objects in the atmosphere, the ability of large objects to move through the air without overheating and without seeming to be distorted on their leading edge by air resistance. There are others, of course. Probably the most basic consideration of all from the viewpoint of science and engineering is the question of motive power. Jets have been suggested, as have rockets. They have to be rejected forthwith because of the inability of carrying fuel and material for reactional ejection. Magnetic drives have been almost universally postulated, so let us consider them for a moment. The Earth does have a very intense magnetic field, but it is restricted to the immediate neighborhood of the planet, and is variable and whimsical in its nature and erratically influenced by sunspot activity. Only magnetic and paramagnetic materials can react to the magnetic field, or at best, another magnetic field set up by induction. To obtain a space drive from such a mechanism, the thrust must be picked up by the magnet or coil, which is reacting with the magnetic field and mechanically transmitting to the craft, and through the structure of the craft to the people, animals, beings, or entities enclosed in the craft and operating it. Thus all of the terrific and unbelievable accelerations, which have been repeatedly observed, must be externally applied to such beings, carnate or not, as may be operating these saucers. The fact that carnate beings cannot withstand external pressure and stresses of such magnitude has been used by the scientifically elite as a means of ridiculing the whole idea of the UFO. Granting the reality of the UFO, these observed facts do not negate the UFO, but merely demonstrate the impossibility of externally applied accelerations due to any causes including jets, rockets, or magnetic drives. If neither the structure of the craft nor the sinew of its pilot can withstand such stress, then actual observation demands another power source. Science, to the contrary, notwithstanding, there is such a source. It is reaction to the gravitational field, which is universal, and as compared to the magnetic field, it is relatively uniform and unfluctuating. While reaction to a magnetic field can be had only from magnetic and metallic materials, reaction to a gravitational field can be had directly from all materials having mass. Thus, gravitational thrust can be applied to all the molecules of any carnate being or UFO structure simultaneously, and so eliminate external pressure. No calculable amount of acceleration would then be felt by any being subjected to such a force, which would act uniformly through the interior of his body. Not only would there be no harmful results, there would not be any sensation of acceleration whatsoever either to the craft or its operators. The UFO is propelled by a cheap source of power, therefore, a reaction with the gravitational field comparable to the reactions of the sails of an old-fashioned sailing ship with the wind. It is high time we stop spending the taxpayers' money for impractical rocket development and invest in basic research to uncover the secret of gravitational drive, which was known even to antediluvian civilizations. Editor's note. From the beginning of his research, Jessup evidently felt that the saucers were propelled by some sort of anti-gravity application. This interest may have been the reason Jessup seemed greatly intrigued by the Allende letters and the Varo edition of his book, since they suggested some radical new invention involving Einstein's unified field theory. It has been long felt by some top UFO researchers that the government has long sponsored secret development projects which were designed to discover a principle which could control the force of gravity. Since no workable theory has evidently been developed to date, it is probably a good thing that the government did pursue the development of rockets instead of throwing all its energy behind developing an anti-gravity application, which might not have been forthcoming by now. There is no doubt that had our rocket program been pursued as it should have been, we would by now be far ahead of the Soviets in the space race. The editor has long felt that the development of an anti-gravity application would be the biggest scientific breakthrough since the discovery of atomic power, and probably a much more important one. In fact, a monopoly of such a discovery by one country could give it control of the earth. End of section 4. Section 5 of The Strange Case of Dr. M.K. Jessup, edited by Gray Barker. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Jessup's interest in the psychic. Many researchers have suggested that it was Jessup's interest in psychic subjects which led to his suicide. It is known that although Jessup began his early research on a rather strict scientific and psychical level, he did later express interest in other explanations for the presence of saucers, including those advanced by Meade Lane and the Borderland Sciences Research Associates. Meade Lane, through the remarkable mediumship of Mark Probert, published much information from discarnate entities who were known as the Mark Probert controls. This information generally can be summed up in the idea that saucers are etheric, or non-material, referred to from our plane, but that they can materialize on our plane so they become completely physical when their operators wish. Readers who are unfamiliar with the BSRA theories may find them in back-issue BSRA publications and a mimeographed book by Meade Lane titled The Coming of the Guardians. We believe this is still in print and available from BSRA at present. Jessup's interest in BSRA is demonstrated by the following letter and subsequent correspondence. December 9th, 1957. Dear Dr. Lane, thanks for your letter of November 16th, rather neglected by me. Was sorry to hear that you were in a mess at your office and glad to know that you were digging out. Cannot be worse than mine, as I have been going over everything getting ready to temporarily abandon the office to other people while I do other things. You can write to the present address until I tell you differently, as this is my present home in the country about 17 miles from Washington. This was in Vienna, Virginia, GB. I had heard that Mark Probert was away for a considerable period, so I knew you had not an opportunity to consult Natali, Raymond Natali, one of the Probert controls, GB. I will be very glad to have Natali's comments on the laws of planetary distribution, however. Incidentally, some weeks ago in New York, I had an interesting experience with a medium of only moderate ability. I asked for this law of planetary distances and got a rather childish and garbled reply outlining a method of triangulation which was rather crude and certainly well known and obvious. The medium, or her guide, evidently misunderstood the purpose of the question. Sometime later, 2 or 3 weeks I suppose, I had lunch with her and explained what I wanted a bit more clearly. As lunch was ending, she suggested we walk over to the nearest Doubleday bookstore, which we did. After looking at various books and talking to the manager, we stopped at the shelf of astronomical books. After pulling out 3 or 4 books of general interest, she reached behind the main lineup of astronomical books and pulled out a pamphlet which I would not have seen at all. It turned out to be the latest discussion of the law of planetary distances, and while it did not give a complete or valid law, it did indicate perhaps one step in advance. In case there is any doubt in Natali's mind about what I want, tell him that the Bode-Titius law is the approximation generally used, but which is not complete. It is a complete law that I want, which will designate and explain the positions of the planets outward from the sun. Yes, critical receptivity is probably a good enough term to cover my present position. However, I am steadily approaching a time when I will give more attention to the less material side of the UFO and other problems. Meanwhile, I am slowly gaining more knowledge and understanding, and it is a part of my long-range planning to cover that side of ufology when I have fully stated the physical problems. In the interim, DeWitt Miller has made a most excellent start toward outlining the non-material aspects. I hope eventually to give the psychic the same exhaustive treatment that I am giving to the physical. It is not from lack of belief or courage that I delay, but that, as I have so often stated, that I want to clear the way in my mind and the minds of my readers so that we have a firm base, so to speak, for taking off into space. Which reminds me of your challenge that I attempt to define space. At the moment, I would be at a loss to do so, and doubt if anyone else has done so adequately, even including the inner circle, another name used for the Probert controls, GB. I do fear we are getting into a semantic tangle with this word. In no sense do I feel that we are working at cross purposes, and you will find eventually that I am supporting you. Up to the present, I have found nothing to shake my confidence that there are both MEST and non-MEST UFOs. But even in the MEST sphere of existence, I feel certain there are many more types of UFO than most casual ufologers imagine. It is simply that I have to take the time to learn and digest what I can ascertain about the non-MEST sphere, which is doubtless infinitely greater than the MEST. And also that I cannot be content to try to present such vast complexity in short articles or in pamphlets. To do this job adequately would require an encyclopedia, for actually we are going around Robin Hood's barn to describe the universe. With the usual best regards, I am most heartily your friend, M.K. Jessup. Note: the letter as published above is somewhat abridged to exclude personal notes and material unrelated to the subject at hand. Riley Crabb, present director of BSRA, has explained that the terms MEST and non-MEST comes from the Dianetics and Scientology systems of L. Ron Hubbard. We could roughly define them as material and non-material, or physical and spiritual, and do hope we are not greatly incorrect in such definition. GB. End of Section 5. Section 6 of The Strange Case of Dr. M.K. Jessup, edited by Gray Barker. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Astronomical Teachings from the Other Side. Evidently, some difficulty was experienced in obtaining the information Jessup had requested from Trance Control Raymond Natali, evidenced by the following letter from Lane to Jessup, which was dated January 7, 1958. While some readers may not be interested enough or possess sufficient astronomical knowledge to evaluate the material, it is presented here as a part of the Jessup mystery, and to offer further proof that Jessup was definitely interested in non-physical aspects of the saucer mystery. GB. Dear Professor Jessup, I enclose herewith one copy of a communication received from Raymond Natali. We have been trying, Mark Probert has done most of it, to maintain contact with Natali, but for some reason there seemed to be a good deal of slipping. But Mark phoned me last night that he believed the last paragraph to be all that N will give at present. I realize how difficult it is to report sources when these are of a psychic or spiritualistic sort, but I venture to hope that, so far as being possible for you and not negating your own objectives, you will let it be known that the role of Mark has been of prime importance, his honesty unquestioned, and his expenditure of time made without mention or promise of payment. Perhaps it will suit you better if I consider that the Natali communication is in your and my private property. That is, I shall not print it for general associates and readers unless you release it for that purpose. Of course, I would like to have the info made available eventually, and perhaps you will not object if it is passed along to a few selected people meanwhile. At your convenience, please let me know your reaction to the gist of the Natali remarks. The implications of correct interpretation of physical problems by excarnate entities may add up to concepts of great import, as I know you will agree. It may soon be possible to check all such info by radionic means, the biometer, etc. Cordially, Meade Lane. P.S. I might add that my own hunch about Bode's law has long been to the effect that its breakdown points toward dual or plural originating sources for planetary distribution in space. But I do not have the mental equipment for discussing such matters. Editor's note. On the following page is reproduced the reply to Jessup by the Mark Probert Control, Raymond Natali, who claimed to have been an earthly astronomer before passing over GB. Concerning the origin of the solar system by Raymond Natali, astronomer. There seems to be no uniform law governing the distances of the planets from the sun. That is, unless more can be learned about the laws of chance that would tie them in with the laws of what we call not chance. Now concerning Bode's law or theory. Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto were created by the shrinking action of a vast field of hot gases that left great rings of itself as it whirled ever inward by vortex motion. This hot gas field was much too spread out to be able to explode, and more than this, it contained most of the heavier elements, and much less carbon nuclei per unit volume for sparking any great explosive action between hydrogen and helium. So it used the law of centrifugal force to break away portions of itself from the gravity pull of its center. I think, too, that it goes without saying that the orbital distances of the ring satellites from the central core were much greater than they are now. But these distances have decreased in a more or less uniform way, depending on the mass weight of the gas rings as they themselves continue to shrink and become relatively solid bodies. As the remainder of the gas field continued to grow smaller, it built up ever greater internal forces by compression, and finally exploded, blowing bits of itself to what may be called random points in space. Then followed what may be called an implosion, wherein the bits that had not been blown too far away from the center of the explosion fell back to the center. But some of the larger pieces got caught in between the gravity pull of the other planets and the sun, where the gravity pressures were equalized. These latter bits of matter then became the planets you know as Mercury, Venus, Mars, and Earth, and the asteroids Eros and Ceres. I would like to say here that the Earth once had 2 moons. This other moon was a few thousand miles smaller than your present moon. By the gradual pull of the sun it was moved into crossing the orbit of your moon and struck it a glancing blow. The result of this collision was not only the scattering of itself over most of the face of the moon, but it changed the moon's rotation, and in time it caused an abnormally rapid escape of the oxygen and helium units in the moon's atmosphere. This in turn left the moon's surface open to the more potent radiations of the sun, and it did not take the sun very long to wring the moon of all its water. End of section 6. Section 7 of The Strange Case of Dr. M.K. Jessup, edited by Gray Barker. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Strange Annotated Book. One of the major parts of the Jessup mystery is a strange annotated paperback copy of the case for the UFO, and the subsequent republication of the annotated copy, allegedly by the military in large mimeographed form. The paperback copy was marked throughout, with underlinings and notations, evidently by 3 different persons, for 3 distinct colors of ink, blue, blue-violet, and blue-green, were used. The notations were most strange, for they implied intimate knowledge of saucers, their means of propulsion, their origin, background, history, and habits of the beings occupying them. Nobody seems to come up with the exact proof of the happenings, but since the book allegedly involved the military, that is somewhat understandable. Please bear in mind that in reporting on these incidents, we are reporting mainly what others have told us and published on the subject, and have had no way of thoroughly checking out the information. According to Riley Crabb, the annotated copy was addressed to Admiral N. Firth, Chief Office of Naval Research, Washington, 25, D.C., and was mailed in a manila envelope postmarked Seminole, Texas, 1955. In July or August of that year, the book appeared in the incoming correspondence of Major Darrell L. Ritter, USMC, Aeronautical Project Office in ONR. When Captain Sidney Sherby reported aboard at ONR, he obtained the book from Major Ritter. Captain Sherby and Commander George W. Hoover, Special Projects Officer, ONR, indicated interest in some of the notations the book contained. I first learned of the annotated copy when I was talking to Mrs. Walton Colquitt John, director of the Little Listening Post, a UFO and New Age publication in Washington. Speaking over the telephone, Mrs. John told me of a strange rumor going around to the effect that somebody had sent a marked-up copy to Washington, and that the government had gone to the expense of mimeographing the entire book, so that all the underlinings and notations could be added to the original text. This was being sent around rather widely, she told me, through military channels. She had not, of course, seen a copy of it, and didn't know too much about it, but somehow she seemed to connect it with an alleged naval experiment, wherein a ship had completely disappeared from sight. I couldn't make too much out of all this until later I had also heard about the strange Allende letters, which told of such an experiment in a most horrifying way. The publication of the mimeographed edition is established, but I have been unable to firmly establish whether or not it was actually paid for by the government. It is established that the Varo Manufacturing Company of Garland, Texas, actually produced the mimeographed edition. I have been unable to find out much about this company, except that it has been said that it has been engaged in secret government work. Apparently, Mr. Crabbe in some way had come into possession of a copy of the special edition, for in his special publication he reproduces the preface as closely as possible to the original Varo edition. We also reproduce this in later pages. To enable you to better understand our reprint of Mr. Crabbe's reproduction, let us try to explain the material in somewhat more detail. Since 3 different people evidently made the notations in different colors of ink, Mr. Crabbe refers to them as Mr. A, Mr. B, and Jimmy. It was assumed that the third person was Jimmy because of the direct use of that name in salutations and references by Mr. A and Mr. B throughout the book. Mr. Crabbe believes that it is possible that 2 of the persons are twins, since there are 2 references to this word appearing on pages 6 and 81 of the original. The assumption that Mr. A is one of the twins may be correct. On page 81, Mr. A is written and then marked through, "And I do not know this came to pass, Jimmy." Then he has written, "I remember my twin." On page 6, he writes in an apparent answer to Mr. B, "No, my twin." We cannot be sure of the other twin. It is probable, Mr. Crabbe continues, that these men are gypsies. In the closing pages of the book, Mr. B says, "Only a gypsy will tell another of that catastrophe, and we are a discredited people ages ago. Ha! Yet man wonders where we come from." On page 130, Mr. A says, "Ours is a way of life, time-proven and happy. We have nothing, own nothing except our music and philosophy, and are happy." On page 76, Mr. B says, "Show this to a brother gypsy." On page 158, the reference to the word "we" by Mr. A could refer to the discredited people. Charles G. Leland, in his book English Gypsies and Their Language, states that the gypsies call each other brother and sister, and are not in the habit of admitting to their fellowship people of a different blood and with whom they have no sympathy. This could explain the usage of the term in the closing notes, "my dear brothers," and perhaps the repeated reference to vain humankind. The paperback copy of The Case for the UFO apparently passed through the hands of these men several times. This conclusion Crabbe draws from the fact that there are discussions between 2 or all 3 of the men, questions, answers, and places where parts of a note have been marked through, underlined, or added to by one or both of the other men. Some have been deleted by marking through. I have not seen a copy of the complete annotated book. Correspondence with Crabbe, with whom I discussed a possible reprint of the entire Varo edition, discouraged me, advising me that the notations and underlinings in themselves mean very little, and are, quote, "little more than teasers," end quote. A BSR associate was interested in such a reprint and looked into the matter, and found that it would cost $10 or $15 a copy to reproduce it in the limited edition it would enjoy. In his correspondence with me of September 24th, 1962, Crabbe clears up the mystery of how he happened to obtain a copy of the original Varo edition. It was the copy that the Navy originally gave to Jessup, and apparently was given to Crabbe by Jessup. This copy, however, rather mysteriously disappeared in April 1960, when Crabbe mailed it to himself from Washington, and apparently he no longer possesses any copy at all. In elaborating further about the original Varo edition, Crabbe writes, quote, "It may be that the CDR, Hoover, or some other open-minded officer in the Office of Navy Research asked Varo to print the notes and the book. On the other hand, maybe Bob Jordan, or some other officer at Varo in Washington at the time, sniffed a possible research and development project and volunteered to do it. Anyhow, I understand that 25 copies were reproduced on standard letter paper, 8.5 by 11, probably on Varo's own little litho press and plastic bound pretty close to 200 pages. Michael Ann Dunn, the stenographer who did the editing, explains why in the introduction. She's married now, living in Dallas, and won't answer her phone. Garland, where Varo is located, is a Dallas suburb. I suppose Varo and/or the Navy judiciously handed out a few copies to those capable of picking up a hot lead on the anti-gravity research trail. From their comment, Allende and his gypsy friends were not educated, not technicians, and did not give any illustrations or mathematical formulae which would help build usable hardware. Varo, by the way, is a small manufacturing firm in electronics and up to its neck in space-age business. Apparently it has succeeded in developing some kind of a death ray gadget, judging from a guarded press release of last fall when a group of congressmen visited there for a demonstration. I think it extremely interesting that certain naval officers and Varo officials took the Allende notes far more seriously at first reading than did Jessup himself. My first reaction to them was one of skepticism, but now I believe them. So does one of our most material-minded, hardest-headed electronic engineer associates in Los Angeles." End quote. Indeed, why all the fuss and bother over a strange marked-up book that even Jessup himself thought was, quote-unquote, crackpot? It is not so much the contents of the notations, but the importance that evidently was attached to them. I had heard about the matter, but figured there was very little to it, until I happened to run into Ivan Sanderson, noted naturalist and UFO expert in New York. I knew that Ivan had been a close friend of Jessup, and felt that, by talking to him on this subject, I might get some clue as to the reason for the suicide, if indeed it had been that. I found that Ivan would not discuss this particular matter, but that he was willing to give me a great deal of information about the Varo edition. Since I am speaking of our conversation from memory, I may not have all the details as they were given to me, but will do the best I can to report on it. I wondered why Jessup had never published the matter. There was probably good reason for that, Ivan told me. He had been called up to Annapolis, where he was dumbfounded. Naval Intelligence showed him a large mimeographed book consisting of the text of his book, along with underlinings and notes. This was particularly puzzling to him in that, to him as a UFO researcher, the various scribbled remarks and underlinings sounded utterly ridiculous. Why had they gone to so much trouble and evidently spent a lot of money, too, on this deal? That was what ran through Morris's mind. I suppose he never did find out. It would be, of course, impossible for us to reproduce the entire Varo edition, even though were we in the possession of the complete text. We will, however, reproduce the preface, which is available in a form as close to the Varo edition as is possible. As to the complete text, we quote Crabbe's explanation. "The notes," added by the Gypsies, GB, "refer to two types of people living in space. Specifically, the stasis neutral and undersea are mentioned as habitats. They seem to live in both interchangeably. The buildings of undersea cities is mentioned. Many different kinds of ships are used as transportation. These two peoples, races or whatever they may be called, are referred to over and over again. They are called LMs and SMs. The LMs seem to be peaceful. The SMs are not. It seems that the Annotations are inclined toward the LMs as they speak more kindly of them than the SMs. Terms such as mothership, homeship, great ark, great bombardment, great return, great war, little men, force fields, deep freezes, undersea building, measure markers, scout ships, magnetic and gravity fields, sheets of diamond, cosmic rays, force cutters, undersea explorers, inlay work, clear talk, telepathing, birding coat, nodes, vortice, magnetic net, and many others are used quite naturally by these men. They explain how, why, and what happens to people, ships, and planes that have disappeared. They explain the origin of odd storms and clouds, objects falling from the sky, strange marks and footprints, and other things which we have not solved. These men seem to feel that it is too late for man to obtain spaceflight. They feel that mankind could not cope with those mind-wrecking conditions that space and sea captain, for mankind is too egotistical, values too much the material, wars over mere parcels of this planet, is too filled with jealousy, and lacks true brotherhood. It may be that the underscore in the book was in the form of a code, or that if read separately that it would have a meaning of its own. Superficial examination has failed to disclose such a code. The underscored text usually refers to the notes by the same man. End of section 7. Section 8 of The Strange Case of Dr. M.K. Jessup, edited by Gray Barker. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Notes on the following reproduction. In reproducing the preface from the Varo edition of The Case for the UFO, we have tried to copy it as closely as possible. Some explanation is needed in understanding the notes in relationship to the text, as published in this form. The distinction between the text of the original book and the handwritten additions made to it is made by the use of red and black ink in printing. The black type indicates the text of the original book. Red type indicates any addition made in handwriting by Mr. A, Mr. B, or Jimmy to the original. In the case of the preface, Jimmy evidently does not make comment. The placement of the notes indicates the paragraph to which they refer, or to their precise position in the book. The page numbers of the original book are denoted in parentheses. The matter on the page numbered follows the number. The page numbers of this edition appear at the bottom of each page. It has been necessary to disregard the italics of the original. The reprint of this preface is not intended to offer a great deal of information, but is presented to the researcher as a sampling of the Varo edition. The subject of UFOs in its present stage is like astronomy in that it is purely observational science, not an experimental one, necessarily. Therefore, it must be based on observation and not on experiment. Observation in this case consists of everything which can be found to have bearing on the subject. There are thousands of references to it in ancient literature, but the authors did not know that their references had any bearing, for the subject did not then exist. The writers were recording such things as met their senses solely through an honest effort to report inexplicable observational data. Hoping in those days that something would come of it, nowadays science is afraid that something will come of it. It will, too. In 1956 or 57, the Air Force will have ships like these in appearance, and will feel safe to announce that human eyes have seen saucers from outer space, but to not be worried, because we too have these ships. Oh, brother, what a farce! Ours will be the jet-propelled, not impropelled. Mr. B. Some of my contemporaries have attempted to prove that all of these phenomena are in some way or other illusory, and that in any case they do not involve flight, wingless or otherwise, mechanical propulsion or intelligent direction. I consider their negative unproven because there is an overwhelming mass of authentic evidence, which can be cited as 1. Direct observation, 2. indirect observation, and 3. Supporting evidence or indication. There is one sphere of indirect evidence in the form of events of mysterious nature which have never been explained. These things would be easy to explain were we to admit the limitations of our own knowledge and the possibility of intelligence elsewhere in the universe operating spaceships, and quite possibly more than one kind of intelligence and more than one kind of spaceship. This world is full of unexplained oddities. The legends of Atlantis and Mu have been favorite targets of the scoffers. They say there are no ghosts, no spirits. Nothing falls from the sky but iron and stone meteorites. But for centuries the Earth was believed to be flat. There was no America, no heliocentric system of Earth and planets, no fossil dinosaurs. Yet we now know these beliefs to have been wrong. Reliable people have been seeing the phenomena known as flying saucers for 1,000 years and more. There are good reports as far back as 1500 BC and before. Thousands of people have seen some kind of navigable contraptions in the sky, and some have sworn it under oath. In a day when oaths were just as good as money in hand, for if incorrect your neck suffered the miracle from the church as a knife from the outraged who took your oath. Mr. B. I cannot agree with any astronomer who insists that all of these things are mirages, planets, clouds, or illusions. The majority of the people are articulate enough to tell their stories, and sincere enough to make depositions before a notary's public. Even scientists concede that these folks saw something. I see nothing particularly odd in strange descriptions of phenomena the like of which has no earthly counterpart, or for which we have no frame of reference. If he does not, then he knows the LMs. Mr. B. This work is a serious attempt to bring order out of chaos, an attempt to pull all of the facets of this controversy into a basic stratus upon which to make an intelligent evaluation of the subject. M.K. Jessup. Washington, D.C., January 13th, 1955. If he does succeed in such evaluation, nobody cares enough to bother believing him, for that would require the effort of courage, and the Gayar are such cowards and conformists. Even if believed, nobody would dare say so, for that would require action, and they dare not act in behalf of a belief that interferes with usual living. Mr. B. End of section 8. Section 9 of The Strange Case of Dr. M.K. Jessup, edited by Gray Barker. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Allende Letters. The Allende letters may have been the work of a crackpot, as Jessup evidently thought at first, or they may have leaked some details of a top-secret naval experiment. At any rate, it is likely that the claims made in the letters were partly responsible for the government's interest in the annotated edition of Jessup's book The Case for the UFO. Neither the editor nor anybody else, to our knowledge, asserts that the letters and the scribbled-up book had any direct bearing upon Jessup's unfortunate death, but they may be pieces of a strange jigsaw puzzle that may be put together some day. Publication of these letters, as well as the other material in this book, is aimed only at giving wide circulation to hitherto unknown facts in the author's life, and with the hope that somebody may be able to put more of it together. On Friday, January 13, 1956, Jessup received a letter from Carlos Miguel Allende, also signing his name as Carl M. Allen, evidently an Americanized version of the same name. The letter was mailed in an envelope of the Turner Hotel, Gainesville, Texas, and postmarked Gainesville. Due to the peculiar spellings and other idiosyncrasies, there can be little doubt that this and a subsequent letter was written by the same Mr. A., whose marginal notes appeared in the annotated book. Jessup himself felt that the letter was written by the same man who had mailed the book to the Navy. The Allende letters, though careless in spelling, capitalization, punctuation, and sentence structure, are nevertheless consistent enough in style to indicate an adherence to custom dictated by the writer's original language. In brief, the letters tell of an unorthodox experiment carried out by the Navy which worked, but with most terrifying results. Apparently, the alleged experiment involved certain electrical or magnetic fields which rendered a ship and its crew invisible. But due either to the shock of the results of the experiment or the electrical effects of it, crew members involved lost their minds. Read carefully, the letters, though awkward in composition, give a great deal of most amazing detail. Following is the first letter received by Jessup from Allende. Carlos Miguel Allende, RD No. 1, Box 223, New Kensington, Pennsylvania. My dear Dr. Jessup, your invocation to the public that they move en masse upon their representatives and have thusly enough pressure placed at the right and sufficient number of places where from a law-demanding research into Dr. Albert Einstein's unified field theory may be enacted, 1925-27, is not at all necessary. It may interest you to know that the good doctor was not so much influenced in his retraction of that work by mathematics as he most assuredly was by humantics. His later computations, done strictly for his own edification and amusement upon cycles of human civilization and progress, compared to the growth of man's general overall character, was enough to horrify him. Thus we are told today that the theory was incomplete. Dr. B. Russell asserts privately that it is complete. He also says that man is not ready for it, and shan't be until after World War III. Nevertheless, results of my friend Dr. Franklin Reno were used. These were a complete recheck of that theory, with a view to any and every possible quick use of it, if feasible in a very short time. There were good results as far as a group math recheck, and as far as a good physical result to boot. Yet the Navy fears to use this result. The result was, and stands today as proof that the unified field theory to a certain extent is correct. Beyond that certain extent, no person in his right senses, or having any senses at all, will evermore dare to go. I am sorry that I have misled you in my previous missive. True enough, such a form of levitation has been accomplished as described. It is also a very common observation reaction of certain metals to certain fields surrounding a current, this field being used for that purpose. Had Faraday concerned himself about the magnetic field surrounding an electric current, we today would not exist. Or if we did exist, our present geopolitical situation would have the very time-bombish ticking off towards destruction atmosphere that now exists. All right. The result was complete invisibility of a ship, destroyer type, and all of its crew while at sea. October 1943. The field was effective in an oblate spheroidal shape, extending 100 yards, more or less due to lunar position and latitude, out from each beam of the ship. Any person within that sphere became vague in form, but he too observed those persons aboard that ship, as though they too were of the same state, yet were walking upon nothing. Any person without that sphere could see nothing save the clearly defined shape of the ship's hull in the water, providing, of course, that the person was just close enough to see, yet just barely outside of that field. Why tell you now? Very simple. If you choose to go mad, then you would reveal this information. Half of the officiers and the crew of that ship are at present mad as hatters. A few are even yet confined to certain areas where they may receive trained scientific aid when they either go blank or go blank and get stuck. Going blank, i.e. an after effect of the man having been within the field too much, is not at all an unpleasant experience to healthily curious sailors. However, it is when also they get stuck that they call it Hell Incorporated.
The man thusly stricken cannot move of his own volition, unless one or more of those who are within the field go and touch him quickly, else he freezes. If a man freezes, his position must be marked out carefully, and then the field is cut off. Everyone but that frozen man is able to move, to appreciate apparent solidity again. Then the newest member of the crew must approach the spot where he will find the frozen man's face or bare skin that is not covered by usual uniform clothing. Sometimes it takes only an hour or so, sometimes all night and all day long, and worse, it once took 6 months to get the man unfrozen. This deep freeze was not psychological. It is the result of a hyperfield that is set up within the field of the body, while the scorch field is turned on, and this at length or upon an old hand. A highly complicated piece of equipment had to be constructed in order to unfreeze those who became true froze, or deep freeze subjects. Usually a deep freeze man goes mad, stark, raving, gibbering, running mad, if his freeze is far more than a day in our time. I speak of time, for deep frozen men are not aware of time as we know it. They are like semi-comatose person who live, breathe, look, and feel, but still are unaware of so utterly many things as to constitute a netherworld to them. A man in an ordinary common freeze is aware of time, sometimes acutely so. Yet they are never aware of time precisely as you or I are. One could be free freeze aware of it. The first deep freeze, as I said, took 6 months to rectify. It also took over $5 million worth of electronic equipment and a special ship berth. If around or near the Philadelphia Navy Yard you see a group of sailors in the act of putting their hands upon a fellow or upon thin air, observe the digits and appendages of the stricken man. If they seem to waver, as though within a heat mirage, go quickly and put your hands upon him, for that man is the very most desperate of men in the world. Not one of those men ever want at all to become again invisible. I not think that much more need to be said as to why man is not ready for force field work, eh? You will hear phrases from these men such as caught in the flow, or the push, or stuck in the green, or stuck in molasses, or I was going fast. These refer to some of the decade later after effects of force field work. Caught in the flow describes exactly the stuck in molasses sensation of a man going into a deep freeze or plain freeze, either of the two. Caught in the push can either refer to that which a man feels briefly when he is either about to inadvertently go blank, i.e. become invisible, or about to get stuck in a deep freeze or plain freeze. There are only a very few of the original experimental DE's crew left by now, sir. Most went insane. One just walked through his quarters wall in sight of his wife and child and 2 other crew members, was never seen again. 2 went into the flame, i.e. they froze and caught fire while carrying common small boat compasses. 1 man carried the compass and caught fire. The other came from the laying on of hands as he was nearest, but he too took fire. They burned for 18 days. The faith in hand-laying died when this happened, and men's minds went by the scores. The experiment was a complete success. The men were complete failures. Check Philadelphia papers for a tiny 1-paragraph, upper half of sheet inside the paper near the rear third of paper, 1944 to 46 in spring or fall or winter, not summer, of an item describing the sailors' actions after their initial voyage. They raided a local to the Navy Yard gin mill or beer joint and caused such shock and paralysis of the waitresses that little comprehensible could be gotten from them, save that paragraph, and the writer of it does not believe it, and says, "I only wrote what I heard, and them dames is daffy. So all I get is a hide-at-bedtime story." Check Observer Ship's crew. Matson Line's Liberty ship out of Norfolk. Company may have ship's log for that voyage, or Coast Guard have it. The SS Andrew Fernseth, Chief Mate Mosley. We'll secure captain's name later. Ship's log has crew list on it. One crew remember Richard Price, or Splicey Price. May remember other names of deck crewmen. Coast Guard has record of sailors issued papers. Mr. Price was 18 or 19 then, October 1943, and lives or lived at that time in his old family home in Roanoke, Virginia, a small town with a small phone book. These men were witnesses, the men of this crew. Connolly of New York, or Boston, may have witnessed, but I doubt it. Spelling may be incorrect. Did witness this. I ask you to do this bit of research simply that you may choke on your own tongue when you remember what you have appealed to be made law. Very disrespectfully yours, Carl M. Allen. P.S. will help more if you see where I can. Z416175. Days later. Notes in addition to and pertaining to missive. Contact Rear Admiral Ransom Bennett for verification of info herein. Navy Chief of Research. He may offer you a job, ultimately. Coldly and analytically speaking, without the howling that is in the letter to you accompanying this, I will say the following in all fairness to you and to science. 1. The Navy did not know that the men could become invisible while not upon the ship and under the field's influence. 2. The Navy did not know that there would be men die from odd effects of hyperfield, within or upon field. 3. Further, they even yet do not know why this has happened and are not even sure that the F within F is the reason for sure at all. In short, the atomic bomb didn't kill the experimenters, thus the experiments went on. But eventually 1 or 2 were accidentally killed, but the cause was known as to why they died. Myself, I feel that something pertaining to that small boat compass triggered off the flames. I have no proof, but neither does the Navy. 4. Worse, and not to mention when 1 or 2 of their men, visible within the field to all the others, just walked into nothingness. And nothing could be felt of them, either when the field was turned on or off. They were just gone. Then more fields were amassed. 5. Worse yet, when an apparently visible and new man just walks seemingly through the wall of his house, the surrounding area searched by all men and thoroughly scrutinized by and with and under an installed portable field developer, and nothing ever found of him. So many fears were by then in effect that the sum total of them all could not ever again be faced by any of those men or by the men working at and upon the experiments. I wish to mention that somehow also the experimental ship disappeared from its Philadelphia dock, and only a very few minutes later appeared at its other dock in the Norfolk, Newport News, Portsmouth area. This was distinctly and clearly identified as being that place, but the ship then again disappeared and went back to its Philadelphia dock in only a very few minutes or less. This was also noted in the newspapers, but I probably forgot what paper I read it in or when it happened. Probably late in the experiments. May have been in 1956, after experiments were discontinued. I cannot say for sure. To the Navy, this whole thing was so impractical due to its morale-blasting effects, which were so much so that efficient operation of the ship was drastically hindered. And then after this occurrence, it was shown that even the mere operation of a ship could not be counted upon at all. In short, ignorance of this thing bred such terrors of it that on the level of attempted operations, with what knowledge was then available, it was deemed as impossible, impracticable, and too horrible. I believe that had you then been working upon and with the team that was working upon this project with yourself, knowing what you now know, that the flames would not have been so unexpected or such a terrifying mystery. Also, more than likely, I must say in all fairness, none of these other occurrences could have happened without some knowledge of their possibility of occurring. In fact, they may have been prevented by a far more cautious program, and by a much more cautiously careful selection of personnel for ship's officers and crew. Such was not the case. The Navy used whatever human material was at hand, without much, if any, thought as to character and personality of that material. If care, great care, is taken in selection of ship and officers and crew, and if careful indoctrination is taken along with careful watch over articles of apparel, such as rings and watches and identification bracelets and belt buckles, plus and especially the effect of hobnailed shoes or cleated shoes, U.S. Navy issue shoes, I feel that some progress towards dissipating the fear-filled ignorance surrounding this project will be most surely and certainly accomplished. The records of the U.S. Maritime Service, House, Norfolk, Virginia, for graduated seamen of their schools, will reveal who was assigned to SS Andrew Forsyth for a month of either late September or October of 1943. I remember positively of one other observer who stood beside me when tests were going on. He was from New England. Brown, blonde, curly hair, blue eyes, don't remember name. I leave it up to you to decide if further work shall be put into this or not, and write this in hopes there will be.
The second letter, received by Jessup from Carlos Allende. Carl M. Allen, RFD, No. 1, Box 223, New Kensington, Pennsylvania. Dear Mr. Jessup, having just recently gotten home from my long travels around the country, I find that you had dropped me a card. You ask that I write you at once, and so, after taking everything into consideration, I have decided to do so. You ask me for what is tantamount to positive proof of something that only the duplication of those devices that produced this phenomenon could ever give you. At least were I of scientific bent, I presume that were I of such a curiosity about something, the which has been produced from a theory that was discarded, 1927, as incomplete, I am sure that I would be of such a dubiousness towards that I would have to be shown those devices that produce such a curious interaction of forces and fields in operation and their product, Mr. Jessup, I could never possibly satisfy such an attitude. The reason being that I could not, nor ever would the Navy Research Department, then under the present boss of the Navy, Burke, ever let it be known that any such thing was ever allowed to be done. For you see, it was because of Burke's curiosity and willingness and prompting that this experiment was enabled to be carried out. It proved a white elephant, but his attitude towards advanced and ultra-advanced types of research is just the thing that puts him where he is today. Or at least, to be sure, it carries a great weight. Were the stench of such an experiment results ever to come out, he would be crucified. However, I have noticed that through the ages, those who have had this happen to them, once the vulgar passions that caused the reaction have cooled off, and further research openly carried on, that these crucified ones achieve something akin to sainthood. You say this is of great importance. I disagree with you, Mr. Jessup, not just wholeheartedly, but vehemently. However, at the same time, your ideas in your own sort of curiosity is that of mine own sort, and besides, my disagreement is based upon philosophical morality, and not upon that curiosity which drives science so rapidly. I can be of some positive help to you and myself, but to do so would require a hypnotist, sodium pentothal, a tape recorder, and an excellent typist secretary in order to produce material of real value to you. As you know, one who is hypnotized cannot lie, and one who is both hypnotized and given truth serum, as it is colloquially known, could not possibly lie at all. To boot, my memory would be thus enabled to remember things in such great detail, things that my present consciousness cannot recall at all, or only barely, and uncertainly that it would be of far greater benefit to use hypnosis. I could thus be enabled to not only recall complete names, but also addresses and telephone numbers,
and perhaps the very important Z numbers of those sailors whom I sailed with them or even came into contact with. I could, too, being something of a dialectician, be able to thusly talk exactly as these witnesses talked and imitate or illustrate their mannerisms and habits of thought. Thus your psychologist can figure in advance the surefire method of dealing most successfully with these. I could not do this with someone with whom I had not observed at length, and these men I lived with for about 6 months. So you are bound to get good to excellent results. The mind does not ever forget, not really, as you know. Upon this, I suggest this way of doing this with myself, but further, the latter usage of myself in mannerism and thought pattern illustration is suggested in order that the goal of inducing these men to place themselves at and under your disposal, hypnotically or under truth serum, is a goal the which could have far greater impact due to correlation of experiences, remembered hypnotically by men who have not seen or even written to each other at all for nearly over 10 years. In this, with such men as witnesses giving irrefutable testimony, it is my belief that were not the Navy, but the Air Force confronted with such evidence, i.e. Chief of Research, there would be either an uproar or a quiet and determined effort to achieve metallic and organic invisibility, nor did they fail to unbesottedly achieve transportation of thousands of tons of metal and humans at an eye's blink speed, even though this latter effect of prolonged experimentation was to them the thing that caused them to consider the experiment as a failure. I believe that further experiments would naturally have produced controlled transport of great tonnages at ultra-fast speeds to a desired point the instant it is desired, through usage of an area covered by 1, those cargoes, and 2, that field that could cause those goods, ships, or ship parts, men were transported as well, to go to another point. Accidentally, and to the embarrassed perplexity of the Navy, this has already happened to a whole ship crew and all. I read of this and of the off-base AWOL activities of the crewmen who were, at the time, visible in a Philadelphia newspaper. Under hypnosis, I can be enabled to divulge the name, date, and section and page number of that paper and the other one. Thus, this paper's morgue will divulge even more positive proof already published of this experiment. The name of the reporter who skeptically covered and wrote of these incidents, of the restaurant barroom raid while invisible, and of the ships suddenly AWOL, and who interviewed the waitresses. Can this be found? Thus his and the waitress's testimony can be added to the records. Once on this track, I believe that you can uncover considerably more evidence to sustain this. What would you call it? Scandal or discovery? You would need a Dale Carnegie to maneuver these folks into doing just as you wish. It would be cheaper than paying every one of all these witnesses, and much more ethical. The idea is to the layman type of person utterly ridiculous. However, can you remember all by yourself the date of a newspaper in which you saw an interesting item more than 5 years ago? Or recall names of men, their phone numbers that you saw in 1943-44? I do hope you will consider this plan. You will progress as not possible in any other way. Of course, I realize that you would need a man who can cause people to want to have fun, to play with hypnotism. One that can thusly dupe those you need to. Number 1, come to his demonstrations and thus call on them to be either or both honored as helping with the show and for doing him a great favor, and or being part of the act for the mite of a small fee. He would have to be a man of such an adroit ingenuity at manufacturing a plausible story on the instant he sizes up his personality to be dealt with that had cost plenty. The ability to convince people of an outright lie as being the absolute truth would be one of his prime prerequisites. Yes, some skullduggery would have to be thought well out and done. The ultimate end will be a truth too huge, too fantastic to be not told. A well-founded truth backed up by unobfuscative proof, positive. I would like to find where it is that these sailors live now. It is known that some few people can somehow tell you a man's name and his home address under hypnosis, even though never having ever met or seen this person. These folks have a very high or just a high psi factor in their makeup that can be intensified under stress or strain, or that is usually intensified under extreme fright. It also can be re-intensified by hypnosis. Thus is like reading from the Encyclopedia Britannica, even though that barroom restaurant raid was staged by invisible or partly invisible men. Those men can see each other. Thus, names in the excitement were sure to have been mentioned, whether last or first names or nicknames. A check of the naval yard's dispensaries or hospital or aid stations or prison records of that particular day that barroom restaurant occurred may reveal the exact names of precisely who were the men, their service serial numbers, and thus the information on where they are from to be secured, and by adroit maneuverings of those still at home, the name of the place where they are at present can be secured. How would you like to actually speak to, or some of the men, a man who was once an invisible human being? May become so in front of your very eyes if he turns off his hip set. Well, if this fantastically preposterous sort of rubbish will be necessary just to do that, the hypnotist, psychologist, and all that. Maybe I suggest something too thorough and too methodical for your tests. But then I, as first subject, don't care to be hypnotized at all, but too feel that certain pull of curiosity about this thing that to me is irresistible. I want to crack this thing wide open. My reasons are simply to enable more work to be done upon this field theory. I am a stargazer, Mr. Jessup. I make no bones about this, and the fact that I feel that, if handled properly, i.e., presented to people and science in the proper psychologically effective manner, I feel sure that man will go where he now dreams of being, to the stars, via the form of transport that the Navy accidentally stumbled upon, to their embarrassment, when their EXP ship took off and popped up a minute or so later on several hundred sea travel trips miles away at another of its berths in the Chesapeake Bay area. I read of this in another newspaper, and only by hypnosis could any man remember all the details of which paper, date of occurrence, and etc. You see? Perhaps already the Navy has used this accident of transport to build your UFOs. It is a logical advance from any standpoint. What do you think? Very respectfully, Carl Allen.
End of section 9. Section 10 of The Strange Case of Dr. M.K. Jessup, edited by Gray Barker. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Comment on the Allende letters. If you have read the foregoing Allende letters, you will have deduced, with some difficulty because of the odd spelling, punctuation peculiarity of writing style, some of the alleged occurrences which caused a ship to become invisible and its crew members mad. You are no doubt just as confused as the editor is after presenting it to you. Just who was Carlos Miguel Allende, or Carl Allen? Why did Jessup take such a great interest in the strange letters? Where is Allende now? Or is there such a person? We have nothing else from Jessup on this subject, and know from the letters only that he expressed great interest after receiving the first one, and made a written reply to Allende, after which Allende sent a second missive in which he appeared to be more cooperative, and even suggested that Jessup have him placed under hypnosis and or truth serum, in order that he could remember the exact dates of the newspaper stories involved and the names of the men involved. Did Jessup follow up on this lead? Only a few of his closest friends may know all the answers, and they seem to be tight-lipped on the subject. The newspaper story referred to evidently concerns a barroom brawl in which invisible men, or partly invisible men, participated. There seems to be another story which hints at the transporting of the ship instantaneously from one point to another. Did the facts that Jessup may have uncovered have anything to do with his suicide? That we doubt, but must consider every possibility. The editor must confess that the Allende letters strike him as being of potentially great importance. There seems to be something beneath the surface here, which we are not seeing, an enigma which suggests of revelation but needs some kind of key. Perhaps it is the odd way in which the letters are composed. It is apparent that the writer possesses much intelligence and above-average knowledge of the sciences. Such a man usually also possesses a liberal education in the arts, and has learned to write clearly. In the Allende letters there is not only an oddness of language and writing style, but an additional oddness in its inconsistency of style. You will note that several sentences may appear normal, after which the writer lapses into almost obscurity. It could be the product of a deranged mind. In our 10 years of corresponding with thousands of people on the subject of UFOs, we have certainly run into our share of oddball letters. A few of these letters have been from people who are mentally ill. Some of them are from illiterates, or partial illiterates, we might say. Some of them have, we are certain, been deliberate hoaxes. But something about the Allende letters strike us as being of a much different sort, and somehow they shake us up a bit. Maybe it is the mystery surrounding the letters, the military's interest in the Varo edition, and Jessup's death. But I believe my curiosity stems mainly from a definite alien quality in the letters, as if they might have been written by somebody from another planet. I have heard a great deal of rumor about the alleged experiment which went haywire. I have also heard about it from a close friend of Jessup's, who is supposed to possess a great many documents which might solve the mystery. This person claims to have some knowledge of the alleged naval experiment, and claims that a strange little man with a small black suitcase was seen to go on board before the experiment was made. This person also claims to have made an investigation into the matter of Carlos Miguel Allende, but to have drawn something of a blank. Nevertheless, what he did find out is most intriguing. I will quote from memory what he told me as best I can. This chap Allende, it turned out, had been living with an elderly couple in a farmhouse. When my investigator arrived there, he was told the couple hadn't been seen for several days, and that the roomer, whom everybody knew only by his first name, had apparently gone away earlier. A day or two previously, a huge trailer truck with several workmen had backed up to the house and stripped it of all furniture about 6 a.m, where it had transported the stuff nobody knew. If the Allende letters had been authentic and that they contained solid information, it seems that those who knew too much were soon disposed of. Did Jessup also know too much? End of section 10. Section 11 of The Strange Case of Dr. M.K. Jessup, edited by Gray Barker. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Comment by Colonel B. Now and then we get a letter from a somewhat mysterious Colonel B. We take cognizance of them not because we think that he is actually a military man. Almost every letter contains advice that the title is not necessarily to be construed as representing a military commission or degree, but because some parts of the letters always seem to make a great deal of sense, while other parts indeed do seem fantastic. This could represent somebody who, for some reason or other, is feeding us either right information or wrong information for publication. Or Colonel B could be completely on the level. The reader should take the editor's own doubts and puzzlement into consideration while evaluating the letter reproduced below. Dear Mr. Barker, some time ago I wrote you some facts concerning the Bender case, after reading his book which you published. Although I do not believe I can justly be called a fan of UFO, I must admit that the subject does hold a certain fascination for me, and that in my travels I visit friends who are also somewhat interested in this matter beyond that of the layman. It seems that I encounter your name quite widely, Mr. Barker, and that I also encounter your promotional literature most everywhere I go. The latest is a blurb, which contains, among other notices, advertising about a book titled The Strange Case of Dr. M.K. Jessup, which I understand is now in the stages of publication. It will indeed be unfortunate if you make too much of a mystery out of the suicide of Dr. Jessup. I have myself heard all sorts of strange allegations, including the fantastic claim that he was murdered by the communists. My educated guess on this matter is that Jessup's unfortunate and rather strange action was brought about by despondency over his career. Although allegedly an astronomer, Dr. Jessup did not follow this profession. Here we delete several sentences of the letter, GB. Dr. Jessup was occupied in a business in Washington when, gaining an interest in flying saucer research and seeing that the sale of flying saucer books were going well, decided to get into this field of endeavor as a means of earning a better livelihood. His first volume, The Case for the UFO, earned the publisher a healthy profit for a small publisher, yet the royalties involved were not of such a size to warrant the author's abandoning his business for full-time work in the field. Subsequent volumes were most unsuccessful and had to be sold by booksellers at cut prices. Dr. Jessup decided to go into the publishing business on his own, but was unable to find the proper capital. When the promise of an expedition to Mexico, where some sort of flying saucer evidence was to be uncovered, failed, this added to the despondency that the author already felt. When I met Jessup in 1958, his mind seemed to be occupied with gaining proof as to the authenticity of certain psychic claims. He offered to carry out an experiment with me whereby, in the event of his demise, he would try to communicate, but I told him I was most busy and was not greatly interested. Subsequently, he did send out long letters to a few close friends, and one popular New York radio show moderator, which suggested similar communication. I do not know if anything came of this or not after Jessup's demise. He also made a great deal of emphasis on a mimeographed version of one of his books, allegedly circulated in the armed services. He also told me of certain letters he had received purporting to contain information about a secret experiment by the military involving an application of the unified field theory. I personally feel that too much was made of this by Jessup, though this can be understandable when one considers it in the light of the sensitivity shown in government circles about the UFO investigation. It is my educated guess that the allegations contained in letters regarding secret experiments were hoaxes of some sort. Yet, because this information did come close to some of the circumstances of actual experiments, of a much less dramatic nature, it may have been thought that there had been some security leak, and this may very likely have been the reason for the great interest by the military. Even though I can make an educated guess as to the nature of the actual experiments, I certainly do not feel it would be in order to do so, and that the sooner that all of these fantastic rumors about Jessup are forgotten, the better it will be for sane research of the type that you are advocating and trying to carry out. I might add that in the course of my various contacts with various far-out circles, I've happened to come into contact with a couple of direct voice mediums who claim to have received communications from Dr. Jessup from the other world, but have not explored these claims, not being greatly interested in the subject. If certain other information I have is correct, Mr. Barker, your publications should do very well later this year. I should estimate during August. I shall say no more, but you very likely will know just what I am driving at when that time of year rolls around. End of letter from Colonel B. End of section 11. Section 12 of The Strange Case of Dr. M.K. Jessup, edited by Gray Barker. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Has Jessup communicated since death? The biggest factor which could solve the Jessup enigma would be communication, as Jessup evidently had in mind before passing, from the author through a medium or trance control. If he said anything of importance, it would be fairly easy to establish some degree of authenticity of the contact. Again, we turn to the publications of Riley Crabb for information on this subject. Crabb wrote in 1959, "We had hoped that the rumor of Jessup's suicide would remain just that, a rumor, but on the night of May 21st, we attended our first Mark Probert séance since moving to San Diego. There, among others, Mrs. Crabb and I met a handsome young couple from Washington, D.C., Mr. and Mrs. Weiner. They had become interested in the work of the Inner Circle when the Proberts visited the nation's capital a year ago. Now they were continuing the contact while on a vacation trip to Southern California. It was while Professor Luntz was occupying Mark's body that Mr. Weiner popped the question, 'Would you care to comment on the suicide of M.K. Jessup?' Mrs. Probert was quick to interject that there should be no invasion of privacy in a matter like this, and Professor Luntz, of course, agreed. Nevertheless, he did refer to Jessup's motive for such an act of desperation as being the logical extension of all-consuming drive for more knowledge. I took no notes at the séance, but if memory serves me correctly, Professor Luntz quoted Jessup's farewell statement as something like this: 'I go to prove for myself the reality of worlds beyond time and space.' I suggested to Professor Luntz that it would be of interest to BSR Associates to hear Jessup's opinions of life beyond time and space when and if he were ready to present them. I then referred to post-mortem communications received through Mark from two former BSR associates, Professor Ryan and Dr. Cruikshank. 'Yes,' replied Professor Luntz, 'it would be better to hear Mr. Jessup's story from him at first hand. Perhaps it can be arranged.' The editor has no further information as to whether Professor Luntz of the Probert Controls was able to arrange such an interview with Jessup. Shortly after that, Meade Lane became ill, and the BSRA direction was capably taken over by Mr. Crabb. It is our impression that there was some difference of opinion between Mr. Crabb and Probert, and that therefore the close association between Probert and BSRA ended. It is in the hope of the editor that some medium will be able to get through to Jessup and report on this for our analysis. To our knowledge, this has not yet been accomplished. One of the reasons for the circulation of this book is to interest other researchers in searching for such information. In a previous book of this series, The Bender Mystery Confirmed, we published what some of its readers have claimed to recognize as a communication with Jessup. A medium, who wished to remain anonymous, recognized a familiar entity and told our correspondent that a saucer friend was coming through. It was allegedly an entity who, though constantly refusing to give his name, insisted he was greatly interested in the UFO phenomena, and had only recently passed on. We quote from this section of The Bender Mystery Confirmed. Saucerian Books, $3. "What is the latest in flying saucers?" the medium asked. "That is what I would like to know from you," was the somewhat jocular reply. "As you know, conditions on this side are quite different from yours. Yes, we have saucers here, but that is a rather difficult concept to get across." "Does somebody know of a recent sighting?" the medium asked our group, and as I am interested in the subject, I told the entity about a recent flap in New Jersey. The entity replied that the sighting was quite interesting and pointed out a similar sighting in his earthly experiences. R said we could question the entity. The entity was then questioned about Albert K. Bender's book, Flying Saucers and the Three Men, and although other entities who had come through earlier in the sitting commented freely on it, the saucer enthusiast from the other side commented quite logically, we felt, when he noted that he had not read the book. He did seem, however, to be familiar with Bender's strange silence during the years preceding his authoring the book. It is interesting to note that the entity asks that he be given a more detailed description of Bender's outline of the universe, as given to him by the space people. The entity's reply follows. GB. "I thought there was some key here," the entity continued. "Bender's universe certainly does not agree with known physical astronomical features as demonstrated in your plane. It does to me, and I do not yet understand this well, fit a conception of a universe from the standpoint of a different etheric plane. I use the word etheric since it may make some sense to you, your having heard it from Mead Lane's group. I use etheric in the same sense. In other words, residents of some planet, maybe one of the solar system, but on an etheric plane, was somehow able to get into contact with a resident of the Earth planet from a standpoint of the physical plane Mr. Bender occupies. Why this was done I would not know, though I suspect some confusion exists here, probably both on the part of Mr. Bender and his visitors. What about the visitors' concern with seawater, if they are not physical in nature? Perhaps they were dealing with the water in an etheric sense. You remember the ancient conception of matter, which was fire, earth, and water, which incidentally was a logical conception, but which more expressed etheric than physical matter? Our correspondent notes that the quotes around physical are of course his, and were placed there because of the tone of voice used by the entity in pronouncing it. GB. From the water standpoint, the entity continued, in this particular concept do we find that point in space and time where the etheric and physical most easily meet, may dovetail on rare occasions, and the relationship most easily understood. I might compare this to a relationship which exists at the gravitational nodes of the Earth-Moon system, and between all bodies for that matter. There seems to be some relationship in these gravitational neutrals, or nodes, to certain relationships between the etheric and physical worlds. I am sorry if this language is necessarily complicated and technical. This is partly due to the complexities of the concepts involved, and also due to the fact that I myself do not understand completely everything I am talking about. I do hope you will accept what I have said in generalities only, but I feel that my rapport is being broken and that I cannot talk long. Are there any final questions? If you are greatly interested in the UFO phenomena and have only recently passed over, I asked, what is your name, since it is possible that I may have known you? No, you have never met me, but my name would be familiar with a great many people in your field. I have my own reasons, and they are good ones, for not giving my name. One of these reasons is that should I identify myself, there would be too much drama associated with it. Undue importance would be given to data which I pass to you, which I am not entirely sure of. Then I would not want to embarrass or cause harassment to certain of my friends on your side. The entity commented somewhat further on another matter, the full text of which is in The Bender Mystery Confirmed. We quote from this not to insist that this entity was Dr. M.K. Jessup, but because of certain comments involving the Earth-Moon system, which the astronomer discussed in his books. Perhaps others can claim more exact contact with Jessup, and if so, the editor would like to hear of such cases. When we talk of the etheric and physical worlds, and particularly of BSRA, we remember a funny little story once related to us by a BSR associate, John J. Astley Cock, who was quite active in that society in UFO research while living in Chicago. One day somebody called him on the telephone. Our friend John immediately suspected a hoaxer was involved when the voice claimed it was from the planet Venus. "Are you speaking of Venus or Venus Etheria?" the associate calmly asked the caller. The hoaxer hung up in dismay. End of section 12. Section 13 of The Strange Case of Dr. M.K. Jessup, edited by Gray Barker. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Addendum. As this book goes to press, we hastily include the following material without having had an opportunity to analyze it to a great degree. It is presented solely for the attention and interest of the reader, who may use his own good judgment in accepting or rejecting it. This material purports to represent a message from a UFO researcher or enthusiast who has passed on, because Jessup, before his death, indicated his desire to get through afterward. Any trance material allegedly from a UFO enthusiast therefore becomes more interesting than it would be ordinarily. The researcher does not identify himself, and in this respect the material becomes similar to that of our previous chapter. It is interesting and unusual that the researcher is not certain as to his present state, in that he is not certain whether he is dead in the usual sense or transported to some other realm or dimension before his body died. It may develop that this is not an unusual opinion of people who have passed on, but the editor knows little of spiritualism and will leave this sort of comment to the more informed. Many readers will question the ability of a medium to transmit such messages, or may not believe in mediumship at all. Thus, the validity of this material is subject to many questions. The medium in this instance claims that the messages came through under unusual circumstances. Usually there is a deep trance state involved, wherein this particular medium speaks into a tape recorder or shorthand transcriptions are made. During the transmission of the following material, however, the trance state was most light, if it existed at all, and the medium felt as if the vocal cords and mouth and tongue movements were seized by a powerful force and made to form and utter the words. The voice was that of the medium for the most part, however, and only slightly changed. No specific voice of any departed person was recognized in the slight change that did exist. The medium does not claim that the message is from any specific individual and requests anonymity. Please do not write the publisher requesting the release of this information. The material was received at a regular meeting of a group consisting in this instance of the medium and 4 other parties. Nothing concerning the UFO field or any directly related field was being probed or under discussion. At the previous meeting, the group had been in contact with a Korean war casualty. Before the lights were turned down and preparation could be made to try another contact with the soldier, the medium was seized by the uncontrollable power and began speaking thus. The tape recorder was turned on a few seconds after the contact began because the transmission had not been anticipated. If you can hear me or not, if you can hear me, concentrate mentally and I will feel the contact. It is very difficult to contact our world. Subject referred to physical Earth, but still termed it our world, as if he still identified himself with it. Yes, I am speaking to you, and you hear me. I can feel that. This message is being augmented technically in a way you would not understand, or in a way that I would fully understand. In response to mental concentration of members of the group who obviously asked the question, "Who are you?" It is not wise to say who I am, otherwise I might not get through again. This is like a visit to friends, as if one were being visited in prison. Though I am not in prison in any sense, I am quite happy but get homesick. I am told by others here that revealing my identity would do no good for the research of which I was so dedicated during my days on Earth. Entity pauses as if question were being asked. A mental question, obviously. What kind of research? The research on unidentified flying objects, or perhaps simply flying saucers to you. I was well known for my work in this field, and I do think I have a few of the answers now that I did not have before. I cannot answer many of the questions I proposed in my writings on this subject, for this was on what you would call a physical level, as you would understand it. I was concerned whether the objects were coming from some other planet in the usual sense you would think of. Let me say in the same way you would consider your building a rocket ship and taking off for and landing on Mars. This all may well be true, though before I came here I was beginning to believe we were not having any such physical visitations. Let me say, the visitations you are having are nevertheless no less real. I am on that particular plane right now, and everything is very real around me. I have been transported in the saucers, and I know they are solid. When you crack your shin bone on a railing, you know they are solid. When did you die? A vocal question. There is some question in my mind if I really died, because I was there one moment and somewhere else the next. I could still see my body, and it was very much alive. They made it appear as if I were dead. I think I died some time afterward, but there are more important things to discuss. for I have limited time. Asked vocally by L. If you didn't die, there is a lot to straighten out. If you could tell us where you were when you died, or whatever happened to you, maybe we could understand what really happened and inform you about it. We have helped many people who are on other planes and don't understand what has happened. I am told that to get my message best understood, I should not dwell on subjects such as this. Some mysteries must remain mysteries for now. Anyhow, this does not seem to be very important. Do not think of me as an omnipotent genius who knows everything. On Earth, I had an IQ of around 150, and that's what I have here. But of course, we do not have that kind of test here. Evidently an IQ test, editor. Let me continue in my limited time allotted. I saw my body before it had died, and I saw its discovery. That is all I can remember. I was in a craft, a flying saucer, if you please, and I was flying away from the city in which I had lived. Gradually the view of the city faded, as if I were changing existence, and I found myself apparently in space. A great window encircled the entire interior. This great circular window varied from translucence to complete transparency, though interspersed in the window were small circles of varying transparency. The window was about 5 feet in height. The window then gradually faded to an entire translucence, and finally to opacity. The small circles remained translucent or transparent, though constantly changing. I guessed these might represent the traditional portholes, which saucer sighters have reported. Who was piloting the craft? Mental question. A man, obviously a normal Earthman, dressed, as I remember so clearly, in a t-shirt and gray work trousers. This man did not tell me who he was, but immediately called me by my first name and assured me that no harm would come to me, that he was only following orders which would be for my own good as well as for the good of all mankind. This man refused to tell me where we were going, but asked me several questions about what I had been doing and what had been going on in the world. He gave me the impression of one who had been away from Earth a great while. The craft apparently ran on an automatic pilot system, for although he sat before controls in a large swivel chair, he paid little attention to these controls and kept his chair turned toward me, where I was sitting on a ledge that encircled the interior at the base of the window. Soon the window became transparent, and I discovered a change had taken place in the outside scene. While I previously had the impression of traveling in space, it now appeared that we were flying through clouds or vapor, and it was very much like being on an airliner while climbing or descending through clouds. In fact, I remember feeling slight bumps as one experiences when an airliner hits turbulence, though this was very slight. A most beautiful country then met my view. This would be impossible to describe, even though I had more time to do so. Our ascent was so rapid that I got very little view of it anyhow at that time, and we landed. We landed in a courtyard connected with a very large building, which I can best describe as being made of metallic glass, the same varying translucence as in the window being present. I was met by 3 people about 6 feet in height, very beautiful people, all male, dressed in odd costume of spun, glass-like appearance, nothing like a ski suit, I might add, having read of such Earth contacts, but more like a uniform. These people smiled, called me by name, and told me to come with them. I was taken into a large conference room and seated very comfortably. Shorter people, not as beautiful, and of a distinct negroid or mongoloid appearance, though their skins were very white, entered bearing several trays containing food and drink. I will not dwell on this except to give you some of the details you mentally ask. The food was not recognizable, but tasted similar to food I was used to, though could not be identified exactly as to state. The food at that time was mainly in briquette form, as if it were processed food. A large melon was served which tasted similar, but not exactly like watermelon or other kinds of melon I had known. The food was not the most delicious I had ever eaten, but I discovered that I was very hungry and devoured all of it. The drink I was served was a blue liquid with an obvious fruit juice base, but with some fermentation and an effect not unlike what a slight alcoholic content would cause. These 3 individuals sat with me as I ate and informed me I was chosen for a definite role which I could assume if I so desired. I was told that I could not return to where I had come from because my body was now dead. If I did not care for the work which they had selected, I could choose some other type of work, or do nothing and go on living there, which I was then told was Venus. If I cared to carry out the work, which would be most difficult, great spiritual rewards would accrue to me. This occupation, I was told, involved work with human beings on earth. Some of this work I do not yet fully understand. A minor work in which I have been engaged has consisted of mental contact with an earth scientist, who does not realize such contact exists. This scientist has written a book, a very good book, and I believe part of its merits are due to my guidance. I was not able to get through to the collaborator of this book, however. I am still going to school, so to speak, and will for quite some time. This education involves philosophy of sorts, which I believe to be the type of re-education all Earth people must have if they avoid consequences of catastrophic nature. Along with my schooling, I have had a great deal of pleasure in visiting my adopted planet and learning something of the ways of living there and of the technology there. "Where are you now?" Vocal question. This is a difficult concept for me to understand or to communicate to you, for I do not believe the frame of reference would be the same. This is not some kind of 4th dimension, which I still believe to represent time, but a state of existence very close to yours, but only slightly removed from your physical existence. I believe that when the philosophies of Earth people are changed, the mere difference in thinking will tend to connect this world and yours on a plane of reality. Remember what I said about my IQ. It is still 150. I am still a poor card player. Yes, I'm afraid I introduced the game to some of my colleagues, and I still could not fix a vacuum sweeper in your home if it went bad. "What do you and your people you are with believe about God and religion?" This question vocal. I am still attending school, so to speak, and can yet see only glimmerings of the realities involving deity, which I would prefer to call it. Let me say that from the knowledge which has been imparted to me, I would say that man's greatest sacrilege is the practice of creating God in his own image, and that this anthropomorphism is not only ridiculous, it is as sinful as cheating your neighbor, or maybe even more so. I do not understand what or who God is, for you cannot find it by seeking this ultimate image. You will find more of an approach to deity in your everyday living than you will in abstract contemplation or going to church. Before I go, let me note that the best way to approach my present world involves the lessening involvement with your own physical world. This is a very practical matter, and is easily begun. Reduced to very simplified language, let me say that you cannot fly to Venus overnight, but you can begin to note what you would term spiritual values, more than you would note physical values, such as occupation with automobiles, fine homes, preoccupation with physical sex, and so on. Once you get away from the physical involvements with your world mentally, you will find that it gradually melts away, and you are in an entirely different environment.
The world you are seeking is that of an intense spiritual one, recaptured physically on the next higher plane. But I don't believe I have expressed this concept very clearly. Anyhow, if this represents oversimplification, it is on the right track. Have you ever been driving along in your car, involuntarily given some other driver the right-of-way, such as helping him out into the lane of traffic, for example, when other cars behind you would likely not do so? This represents a slightly less involvement with your own physical world. Did you notice how the sun shone more brightly, how the scenery, if even momentarily, became more beautiful? To a very slight degree, your physical world changed. Think how much it would have changed had you emphasized your lack of physical involvement to a greater degree. I want to caution you not to go hog wild into such an attempted development without the proper guidance. Remember that the words I have spoken represent an oversimplification.
Are the saucers such as you traveled to Venus in still visiting us?
These visits have been going on for centuries, and will continue. They have not been too meaningful until recently. These are not necessarily exploratory craft, due to an increase in the awareness of human beings who, despite what you may hear and think, are nevertheless rising in consciousness. These craft are seen more than previously. I think you realize, though, that not everybody sees these saucers. Have you noticed that most people who tell you of seeing saucers are people who, if you think about it, seem to have a greater awareness than the average individual? In fact, usually they are spoken of in the press and by their neighbors as people who have great reputation for truth and are extremely well thought of. If you think about this, you may be able to deduce a part of what I am saying about a general increase in awareness. Yet these saucers are not seen generally. I do not think, for example, that the President of the United States sees them or is aware of them. You will find that there is indeed something unique involved between the people who see the saucers and those who do not see the saucers. I never saw what I could distinguish as a saucer, without doubt, while I was on Earth, though I constantly searched the skies for them.
Why are you on this plane, then, with obviously increased awareness and a higher level of consciousness, if you did not have this before and could not see the saucers before?
This I do not attempt to understand, and I believe I am where I am because of some technology developed by the Venusians.
Do you think the Earth is going to be destroyed by atomic bombs?
I have asked about this, but my teachers either do not know or will not tell me. They do not seem to be gravely concerned about the matter. It is my impression that they believe they can prevent this, either by some means of their own, which are technical, or by the education of Earthmen.
Are the saucers going to land at any time and reveal themselves?
This and previous questions not otherwise noted were asked vocally. That depends upon what kind of saucers you are referring to. As an intelligent man who knows something of the universe on a plane of Earth level, I believe that the Earth has been visited many times in the past by intelligent beings of your level, and that the Earth may be visited again. I do not believe the people of my present existence will make such a landing, or whether they could if they wanted to at this time. Anyhow, I am not permitted to reveal everything, and information of this nature must be imparted gradually. Let this information be known to UFO circles if they are interested in hearing it. I must go now, and I thank you for listening.
The control of the medium vanished as soon as it began. The regular séance was not held because of the excitement caused by the extraordinary communication. The medium remembered most everything that was transmitted, as opposed to lack of memory in usual trance states. No date of the transmission was given except that it occurred in May. The group giving out the above information is composed of people who have little interest in the UFO subject at the present time, and who actually feel that the interjection of such matters at this time would label us as a UFO group. Apparently, they feel that UFO study is somewhat beneath the dignity of the group, and would make their other work less believed and trusted. An unusual attitude indeed, but we are most grateful to them for passing on the above, which has been most interesting. While they will not encourage further transmission of this sort, they have promised to inform me if it should happen. Again, the editor presents this for what it may be worth, and does not intend to insist that this might represent a communication from the subject of this book. Its inclusion should not be construed as any such connection or as an endorsement of its validity. Riley Crabb, director of the Borderland Sciences Research Associates, and to whom we are indebted for a great deal of the material reprinted herein, has additional comment about Dr. Jessup in his June 1963 issue of the Office of Borderland Research. Under the heading, M.K. Jessup's Suicide Confirmed, he writes, "While in New York City, we have confirmed the information given to us by Professor Charles Luntz through Mark Probert at a San Diego seance in 1959. Luntz told us then that Jessup had planned and carried out his own death as a means of proving the reality of the other side of the veil. Since then, the rumor has persisted among saucer researchers that Jessup was executed because he knew too much about UFOs and contactees among certain government officials. Jessup took the time and trouble to write several letters to New York friends, including Long John Nebel and the president of a New York saucer group, telling them of his intentions to contact them soon after his passing and prove his identity. Long John fully intended to set up a seance and a panel on his all-night radio program and arranged for Jessup's appearance before the world, but was finally dissuaded from doing so. If Jessup had chosen a competent medium and had established rapport with the medium through months of practice before his passing, he might have succeeded in bringing evidential material through under ideal circumstances. Those of us who have pushed psychic research for years know how difficult it is to predict the performance of any medium in any given situation, even under the best of conditions, and I wouldn't consider the smoke-laden, skeptical atmosphere of the Long John show the best of conditions, especially for an untried spirit like M.K. Jessup, still bound up in the emotional trauma of self-murder. This book was in no way intended to represent a solution to the mystery surrounding the passing of Dr. Jessup. If it is therefore disappointing to those who expect complete answers, we are very sorry. As editor, I believe I have accomplished what I set out to do, to present as much material as possible for the reader's information. As is the case of some other books I've published, such as Flying Saucers and the Three Men, $3.95, I hope that this material will draw much meaningful comment from the readers of this work. If additional meaningful material comes to light as a result of this publication, perhaps it can be added to later editions or printed separately as a supplement. End of Section 13, and end of The Strange Case of Dr. M.K. Jessup, edited by Gray Barker, read by Ben Tucker.